What happens when the pressure inside a championship clubhouse finally finds a way out? Not through a press conference. Not through a carefully managed trade deadline move. Not through the kind of quiet, professional reshuffling that front offices prefer when they need to make difficult decisions without creating unnecessary noise. Through a bat. Flying through the air. Aimed at the wrong person. The night the Los Angeles Dodgers general manager recalled the uniform and designated Jack Dreyer for assignment was supposed to be a front office decision. Clean. Decisive. Handled through proper channels with the kind of professionalism that a billion-dollar organization is expected to maintain regardless of the circumstances that made the decision necessary. Instead it became something else entirely. Dreyer was furious. The kind of furious that bypasses rational thought and professional consequence and lands somewhere much more dangerous. The kind of furious that makes a man reach for a bat in a locker room and make a choice that cannot be taken back. And Shohei Ohtani, the man whose second win of the season Dreyer had ruined, the reason the GM had made the call, the player at the center of everything, was in the room when it happened. The bat flew. A brawl broke out. And then Ohtani was on the ground. Breathing heavily. In a scene that nobody in that organization will forget regardless of how many championships this team eventually wins. So how did it get here? What did Dreyer do that was serious enough to cost him his roster spot? Why did the GM move with such sudden, decisive force? And what does the image of Shohei Ohtani on the ground tell us about the real cost of the chaos that has been building inside this clubhouse? Let's go back to the beginning. Because this story didn't start with a bat being thrown. It started much earlier. And the path from there to here reveals something important about what happens when professional standards collapse in the presence of someone who holds himself to a completely different standard than everyone around him. To understand the full weight of what Dreyer cost Ohtani, you have to understand what a second win means in the context of this specific season. Ohtani's return to two-way competition has been the defining narrative of 2025. The baseball world watched his recovery with the kind of attention usually reserved for events that transcend sport. Every bullpen session was analyzed. Every velocity reading was dissected. Every start was treated as evidence in an ongoing case being built toward a single conclusion: was the arm fully back? Was the two-way experiment resumable at the level that had made him the most valuable player in the history of the game? The first win of the season answered part of that question. It confirmed that the mechanics were sound. That the command was sharp. That the competitive intelligence that makes Ohtani dangerous on the mound, his ability to read hitters, adjust mid-game, execute pitches under pressure, had survived the surgical process intact. The second win was supposed to confirm something more. It was supposed to establish a pattern. To move the conversation from whether Ohtani could return to this level toward how long he could sustain it. To begin building the statistical foundation for a two-way season that would put his 2025 campaign in direct conversation with the greatest individual seasons in baseball history. Dreyer ruined it. Not through bad luck. Not through the kind of honest failure that every pitcher in a bullpen experiences over the course of a long season. Through something that crossed a line the Dodgers GM identified immediately when the details of what had happened became clear. The win didn't just disappear. It was taken. By someone who should have protected it. And the GM responded the only way an organization with these expectations and this standard could respond. The call came faster than anyone expected. In most situations involving roster decisions of this significance, there is a process. Conversations happen between the GM and the manager. Data gets reviewed. The player's history, their contract situation, their potential value in other contexts, all of it gets weighed before a final decision is communicated. This was not most situations. The GM recalled the uniform before the dust from the previous night had fully settled. The decision, by all accounts, was made with the kind of clarity that only comes when the situation removes ambiguity completely. When what happened is clear enough, serious enough, and damaging enough to the organization's core standard that the normal deliberation process becomes unnecessary. Dreyer was designated for assignment. DFA'd. Removed from the roster in a move that sent a message far more direct than any public statement the organization could have issued. The message was simple. The message was the same one that had been delivered earlier in the season when the bullpen had created problems serious enough to reach Ohtani's level of concern. The message that this organization, built around a player who holds himself to a standard that most professional athletes can only approximate, does not tolerate performances that undermine what that standard is trying to build. But nobody anticipated what happened next. Because Dreyer had not yet been told. And when he found out, not through the proper channels, not in the private, professional conversation that should have preceded the news becoming more widely known, the reaction that followed was one that the Dodgers organization will be processing for a long time. There is a version of this story where Dreyer receives the news, feels the anger that any professional athlete would feel upon losing their roster spot, processes that anger privately, and moves through the situation with the kind of dignity that preserves whatever professional reputation remains. That version did not happen. What happened instead began with words. Loud ones. The kind that fill a locker room and make everyone in it aware that something is wrong before they fully understand what. The kind that bypass the normal social filters that professional environments maintain even in moments of genuine conflict. Dreyer was furious in a way that was visible, audible, and immediately uncomfortable for everyone present. His anger was not directed at the front office in the abstract. It was not aimed at the decision itself as a professional outcome he disagreed with. It was aimed at Ohtani. The attempt to shift blame began verbally. The argument that Dreyer constructed in those moments, loudly, in front of teammates, in a locker room that had gone very still very quickly, placed responsibility for his DFA at Ohtani's feet. The suggestion that the standard being applied, the expectation that was not being met, the reason the GM had made the call, all of it, in Dreyer's version of events, traced back to Ohtani's influence on how the organization evaluated performance. Teammates who were present have described the atmosphere as immediately tense. Not the ordinary tension of professional conflict being navigated, but something sharper. Something that felt like it was moving toward a place that nobody wanted it to reach. And then the bat left Dreyer's hand. There are moments in any situation that function as a point of no return. A line that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed regardless of what follows. A moment that permanently divides the story into before and after. The bat being thrown was that moment. In the history of professional baseball clubhouses, equipment has been thrown in anger before. Helmets, bats, various objects that happen to be within reach of a furious athlete who has not yet developed the capacity to separate his body from his emotions in difficult moments. It happens. It is not acceptable, but it is not unprecedented. What made this different was the direction. The bat was not thrown into the wall. It was not hurled at the floor or into an empty corner or toward a space where the expression of anger could release itself without creating a specific target. It was thrown toward Ohtani. The man who had done nothing in that locker room except exist as the standard that Dreyer felt he had been measured against and found wanting. The man who had not asked to be the reason for anyone's DFA. The man who shows up every day, prepares with a completeness that makes everyone around him confront their own relationship with that same standard, and then competes at a level that turns that preparation into results. Ohtani was in the room. And Dreyer, in a moment of fury that had completely overtaken whatever professional judgment remained available to him, chose a direction for that bat that nobody in the organization will ever fully explain away. The brawl that followed was immediate. When the bat left Dreyer's hand, the locker room stopped being a professional environment and became something more primal. Something that operates on instincts faster than conscious thought. Teammates moved. Not slowly, not after deliberation, immediately. The protective instinct that exists in any group of people who share a common space and common purpose activated before anyone had time to think about what they were doing or what the consequences might be. The brawl was not a clean, bilateral confrontation. It was the chaotic, multi-person collision that happens when a group of professional athletes, men whose physical capabilities exist at the extreme end of human development, are suddenly operating without the professional structure that normally governs their interactions. Voices. Movement. The sounds that a locker room full of large, strong, agitated people makes when the normal boundaries dissolve. And somewhere in that chaos, on the ground, breathing heavily, was Shohei Ohtani. The image of Ohtani on the ground is the one that will persist from this night. Not because of what it says about Dreyer, whose career has effectively ended in the worst possible way. Not because of what it says about the organizational tensions that have been building beneath the surface of a season full of elevated expectations. Because of what it says about the cost of chaos in an environment that had been built around a man who never creates it. Let's be precise about this. Because the image demands precision rather than dramatization. Ohtani on the ground, breathing heavily, in the aftermath of a brawl that he did not start and did not ask for. This is not a story about weakness. It is not a story about vulnerability in any sense that diminishes what he is or what he has built. It is a story about what happens when the environment around an extraordinary person fails to maintain the standard that person represents. Ohtani has spent his entire professional life building a world around himself that is defined by control. Control of his diet. Control of his preparation. Control of his physical condition. Control of his competitive environment through the sheer excellence of his daily process. He has constructed, through years of disciplined effort, a professional existence where the variables that can be managed are managed completely. He cannot control what other people do with their anger. He cannot control the moment when someone's professional failure becomes personal enough that a bat gets thrown in a direction it should never have been thrown. He was on the ground because the chaos that he has never created, that his entire professional philosophy is organized around preventing, arrived from outside the boundaries of what his preparation could address. And the baseball world, seeing that image, understood something important. The standard Ohtani represents is not just about what it produces in him. It is about what its absence produces in the people around him who cannot meet it. The Dodgers' response to what happened in that locker room was swift in the ways that counted. Medical attention was immediate. The assessment of Ohtani's condition was the first priority, before any other organizational question was addressed. The breathing that had been heavy in the immediate aftermath of the brawl stabilized. The physical evaluation that followed confirmed what the organization needed to confirm before anything else could be addressed. Ohtani was going to be okay. With that established, the organization turned to everything else. And everything else was considerable. Dreyer's DFA, already processed before the locker room incident, now carried an additional weight that transformed it from a roster move into something much more significant. The formal response to what he had done in that locker room, the bat, the blame shifting, the brawl, would be handled through channels that extend beyond baseball operations into the legal and contractual frameworks that govern professional conduct. The message to the remaining roster was delivered not through a dramatic meeting or an emotional speech but through the continuation of the standard. Practice the next day. Preparation exactly as scheduled. The process that Ohtani embodies and that the organization has built itself around, continuing, uninterrupted, as if the chaos of the previous night was exactly what it was. An aberration. Not a reflection of what this team is. Not a sign of what this season will become. A single, terrible moment produced by a single person's inability to meet the standard that everyone else in that organization is working every day to approach. There is a version of this story that focuses entirely on Dreyer. On the anger, the bat, the brawl, the DFA. On the dramatic collapse of a professional career in a locker room moment that will follow him everywhere he goes in baseball afterward. That version of the story is real. Those things happened. The consequences are real and they are permanent. But there is a deeper story available to anyone willing to look past the drama toward what the drama reveals. Shohei Ohtani was on the ground in a locker room brawl that started because someone blamed him for being the standard. For being the reason the bar was set where it was set. For being the player whose daily commitment to excellence makes ordinary professional effort visible as something less than what this organization requires. He didn't create that standard as a weapon. He didn't hold it over teammates as a form of professional dominance. He simply lives it. Every single day. In his diet and his preparation and his competitive approach and his relationship with the process of becoming as good as he is capable of being. And someone, facing the loss of their roster spot, decided that standard was the problem rather than the solution. Decided that the person embodying it was responsible for the gap between what that standard required and what they had been able to deliver. The bat flew. The brawl happened. Ohtani was on the ground. And then he got up. Because that is what the standard requires. Not the absence of chaos. He cannot control what other people do with their anger. But the response to chaos. The return to process. The refusal to allow someone else's inability to meet the bar to become a reason to lower it. The GM recalled the uniform. Dreyer was DFA'd. The organization protected its standard with the same decisiveness it had demonstrated earlier in the season. And Shohei Ohtani, breathing heavily on the floor of a locker room that had just witnessed something it will never fully forget, got up and prepared for the next day. Because for Ohtani, there is always a next day. Always another at-bat. Always another start. Always another opportunity to demonstrate, quietly and without celebration, what it looks like when someone has decided that the standard is never the problem. The standard is always the answer. Even when the world around it temporarily loses its mind.